Imagine if a city made entirely of gold was discovered in America's Midwest, hidden away for centuries, until one day it was unearthed by a group of archaeologists. You might think this is something that would only ever happen in fiction. But that's not actually true because it already has happened before. These mysterious sites are known as the Spiro Mounds, and they hold many secrets from their ancient past. Before the 1930s, when the area was inhabited by Native Americans, it was home to several large mounds which had been created hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He uncovered evidence of a massive settlement here which dated back around 800 years. Somewhere between then and the 16th century, several of the settlement's buildings were burnt to the ground. Then in the early 1940s, new excavations took place here, directed by archaeologist J.E.K. The largest of these mounds served as the chief's burial ground. Between the years 1350 and 1550, the settlement experienced a decline in population. This caused many of the mounds to fall into disrepair. The people who lived here weren't the first to build a structure with a golden roof. However, archaeologists haven't found any artifacts that prove what deities were worshipped here. Interestingly enough, many Native American tribes have myths and legends which describe a culture of people who lived in the Midwest long before the arrival of Europeans. Some say these people were white, and some say they worshipped a single god. They also avoided using metal detectors, so as not to interfere with any underground artifacts. Their goal was to learn as much as possible about the people who lived here without disturbing their graves or their homes. Either way, the tribes who lived in the area knew that there had been another culture here before them. People come from all over the world to see the ancient temples and learn about the people who built them. While we may never know for sure whether or not the people who lived here were descendants of Israel, one thing is certain: they left behind a legacy that will last for centuries, and they tried to preserve its memory through stories passed down from generation to generation. Thousands of years before them, the Egyptians constructed pyramids, some of which had roofs made out of gold. Others believe that the buildings here were modeled after the Second Temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in the 1st century AD. This bell bears a Hebrew inscription which translates to, "For the Niganot, the bells of the temple." This discovery lends credence to the idea that the people who built this city were Jewish. However, there are two possible explanations for this artifact. On the one hand, it could prove that the builders of Spiro Mounds were descendants of Jews who traveled from the Middle East to North America. On the other hand, it could mean that later inhabitants of the city picked up the bell after the main temple had been destroyed and repurposed it as part of their own religion. Either way, it is clear that the people who lived here had a deep respect for the land and the natural world around them. These claims are based on the architectural features of the buildings, which seem to resemble the temples in Jerusalem. But it should be noted that these structures are thousands of miles apart and separated by two different continents. So it seems unlikely that the people who lived here had ever seen the temples in Jerusalem. Unless, of course, they were descendants of Israelites, who had migrated to North America thousands of years ago. One of the most well-known examples is the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's believed that the roof of this pyramid was originally covered in white limestone, but later it was removed and replaced with granite. Sometime during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, this part of the pyramid may have been gilded with gold leaf to make it shine brightly in the sun. But the Egyptians weren't the only ones to do this. The Greeks, Romans, and many others constructed buildings with golden roofs. But perhaps the best example comes from Israel. Here atop the Temple Mount stands the Dome of the Rock, a beautiful building with a golden roof which dates back to the 7th century. Some historians believe the people who built the temple at Spiro Mounds were inspired by the Dome of the Rock, and that they covered their structure with gold. However, there is more evidence that points to the people of Spiro Mounds being Native Americans who simply borrowed architectural ideas from the cultures of the Middle East. Eventually, they were completely abandoned and the surrounding civilization fragmented. Historians aren't sure what caused this decline, but it may have been due to crop failures, warfare, or natural disasters. The second largest mound is thought to have been used for ceremonies, and the third largest may have been used as a platform for a wooden temple. Well, the truth is that no actual gold has ever been found here, but some of the buildings in this city may have had golden roofs. This may sound like a small detail, but it's actually quite significant. This is because the Bible mentions a golden roof when describing the temple Solomon built in Jerusalem. This led many people to believe that the builders of the temples at Mounds may have been Israelites who fled Europe thousands of years ago. In total, the Spiro Mounds cover an area of 140 acres. Although the exact location of the settlement is unknown, it's believed that it was situated somewhere close to the mounds themselves. This would have given the city's residents easy access to the rich soils nearby. Evidence of maize, beans and squash have all been found here, suggesting that these foods were staples in the diet of the people who lived here. They also hunted deer, rabbits, and wild turkeys, but as mentioned earlier, some of these people reached high levels of wealth and power. As such, they probably enjoyed diets consisting of more meat, fruit, and vegetables. And while they uncovered similar artifacts, they believed that this settlement was actually part of a much larger culture known as the Mississippian culture. This culture was widespread in the Midwest and East Coast, and lasted from around 800 AD to 1600 AD. Some of the most famous locations associated with the Mississippian culture include Cahokia, Moundville, and the city of Arney. It's believed that the Mississippian culture had around 40 major ceremonial centers. However, they never developed any kind of centralized government. Instead, each city acted independently from one another. This suggests that the city at Spiro Mounds was likely called a chiefdom rather than a kingdom. The power in this city probably lay with a small group of chiefs who held more wealth and power than anyone else living there. According to Warren's research, the land here was first settled by humans in the year 700 AD. As such, the people who lived here were sometimes referred to as the Mississippian, but recent DNA analysis suggests that they may have actually been Native American ancestors who came from further south. Their society was complex, and they excelled in engineering, agriculture, and art. Each year, people would gather together from all over the Midwest to celebrate their culture and exchange goods. Some historians believe that the Mississippian culture could have boasted a population of 20 million people at its peak. When European settlers arrived in the 16th century, they wiped out nearly every trace of this culture, and today almost nothing remains. At its peak, the city was likely home to more than 4,000 people, and was surrounded by defensive walls. Pottery found here shows that the residents of this city had traded with other civilizations throughout the eastern United States. They also appear to have had social classes, with some people enjoying higher statuses than others. There was even evidence of human sacrifice here, suggesting that there may have been some sort of warlike religion practiced by the city's inhabitants. Over time, erosion caused these mounds to be worn down, and much of the treasure they once held was taken by grave robbers. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that excavations began to take place here. While we know a great deal about them now, there is still much to learn, and there are those who believe these mounds could be evidence of a lost tribe of Israelites who made their way to North America thousands of years before Christopher Columbus. If this were true, it would rewrite history as we know it. But let's start with what we do know about the city before moving into some of the more controversial theories. In fact, there are multiple places across the United States which may have been cities made out of gold, or at least large settlements made up of buildings with golden roofs. Today, the site of the Spiro Mounds is located within Oklahoma's Spiro Mounds State Park. But this isn't always how things were. The first excavations were carried out by the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey under the direction of archaeologist T.D. Warren. By the year 900 AD, the settlement had been completely abandoned, and the reason why remains a mystery. It's believed that the Mississippian culture got its name from the Mississippi River, which runs through the eastern edge of the United States. So far, archaeologists have identified 10 mounds here, although there are likely many more buried underneath the ground. While these people were skilled farmers, their legacy didn't last forever. However, after reading about all this, you may have noticed that none of it really explains the golden aspect of the city. But before we go into the controversial theory that the people who lived here were descendants of Israelites, let's look at the physical evidence. As mentioned earlier, the mounds at Spiro Mounds were used for religious purposes. But going back to the architecture of the city, many people believe that the temples here were modeled after the first temple in Jerusalem, which was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 6th century BC. One of the main pieces of evidence which supports this claim is a fragment of a broken bell, which was found near the temple. When excavating the site, archaeologists were careful not to disturb any of the bones they found. Today, the Spiro Mounds are a popular tourist destination,